doesn't look like a war correspondent, does he? But he is. How do I know? Well, that's me at home one evening when I first got back from Korea, and believe me, I was glad to be home. For one thing, it gave me the time and chance to write one of those now it can be told stories that we ex-war correspondents like to do. I'd like to tell you about it. It's the untold story of the American merchant marine during the fight for Korea. It's a story too few Americans know about. Let me show you what I mean. There's a lot of the blue Pacific between the United States and Korea. I really found out when my boss sent me to help cover the war when the commies invaded South Korea. You remember how it started. The attack came hard and fast. Thousands of well-trained North Koreans with mountains of Russian-made equipment swarmed down across the 38th parallel. The Reds struck with lightning speed. The tiny army of the infant Republic of Korea was no match for the big league communist war machine. The world watched as the opening of the tragic drama exploded. The free and peace-loving world wondered if this was the beginning of an awful new global upheaval that would engulf us all. What could be done to stop it? While the world waited, the UN acted. The United Nations, which had given birth to the Republic of Korea after VJ Day, took historic steps to halt the communist invasion, moved to prevent the outbreak of global conflict. Remember the tense days of late June 1950? It was only a matter of hours after the United Nations ordered intervention of UN forces that the first American might was committed in the fight for Korea. And it was only a matter of hours, too, before I was on my way to another part of the world and another war. As I winged over the mountains and plains, over the cities and farms, I saw spread below me the greatness and vastness that is America. I saw the slumbering giant, Uncle Sam, being mobilized again in the cause of freedom. I knew that down there was a panorama of industry with blast furnaces and assembly lines and farms and ranches with wheat and corn and livestock. I knew that Americans down there were producing the supplies and food needed in Korea now and that might be needed somewhere else tomorrow. Even then, American merchant ships had started to play their part. On the East Coast, 10,300 nautical miles from Korea, merchant ships were loading cargo for the war zone. It was coming from the Gulf Coast, with 9,700 miles of ocean to cross. Cargo for Korea was being loaded on the West Coast, too, 5,000 miles from its battleground destination. As I flew over the Pacific to my new assignment, I realized that planes could fly a few men and a few special cargoes to war, but only American merchant ships could carry the men and materials the thousands of miles from stockpiles and production lines and farm fields. Only U.S. merchant ships could do the real job of supply. I got to Korea on a holiday, the 4th of July, but there wasn't much to celebrate. The Reds had captured Seoul and swarmed southward from the fallen capital. The communists rolled ahead as valiant South Koreans and the first thin line of American doughboys threw up defenses near Suwon in mid-July. kids who had been occupation troops in Japan a month ago became the men of Korea, men to rank with the fighters of Bataan and Normandy and Iwo Jima. We blunted the communist steamroller at bloody Daejeon. We showed them we could hold at Daegu. We wrote an inspiring saga of courage across the beachhead perimeter, holding till help came. And help was coming. U.S. reinforcements and supplies from Japan and the United States, and help from the other United Nations too. For this time, there would be no Bataan, no Corregidor. While cargo to Korea moved across the Pacific in American ships, while thousands of troops were coming, the picture began to look up. For now, it was early August, and the first Marines were landing at Busan to bulwark the South Korean defense line. These were the weeks of decision, while do-or-die soldiers and Marines, Americans and South Koreans, fought side by side to hold the enemy. The American ships were coming with troops and guns, with the reinforcements and supplies to take the offensive. Now, it was early September, and something big was in the wind. That something big came at dawn of September 15th at Incheon. It was like World War II all over again. Massed land, sea, and air might of the United States, this time fighting for the United Nations, pulled the big trick out of Uncle Sam's hat and landed at Incheon, far behind enemy lines. At Incheon, I decided to someday write this story. For it was there I realized how important American merchant ships had been to what we were doing. I remember the mountains of supplies, the hundreds of artillery pieces, and the millions of tons of food. And as I saw all this, I thought, how alike is a ship, an American cargo ship, and an infantryman in the military scheme of things. Yes, American merchant ships and doughboys somehow have a lot in common. Neither is ever really glamorous. They do the chores that it's hard to tell about. An infantryman doesn't wear a fancy uniform when he's at work, and a cargo vessel just isn't a sleek-looking, streamlined hunk of metal that flies through the air. But you need them. You've got to have them. They're part of the team necessary to win a fight in Korea or anywhere else. After Incheon, it looked easy, and it was easy, but at times costly, as we captured Seoul and punched north of the 38th parallel. Many thought it would soon be all over, but in early November, the Chinese communists entered the war in force. At least 1 million Reds came down from Manchuria. Again, the United Nations were outnumbered. Again, disaster threatened as the Chinese cut off most of the American 8th Army and slammed shut a trap around the Marines in northeast Korea. Again, it was a do-or-die fight as Leathernecks and doughboys fought their way south to a new defense line, or to the harbors at Hungnam and Wonsan on the North Korean east coast, where they could be evacuated by sea. The Wonsan and Hungnam operations were epics which surpassed even the British withdrawals from Dunkirk. American merchant ships and naval vessels removed all the troops and every last bit of equipment. American merchant shipping helped turn disaster into a brilliant chapter in military history. And the Americans didn't forget the South Korean civilians. One American merchant ship crammed more than 14,000 persons aboard her. 14,000 Koreans who wanted so much to live in freedom that they were packed on a vessel designed to carry less than 75 passengers. But don't think American merchant ships did all the job. The U.S. Navy was there in force. But merchant ships were part of the team. Ask any sailor or soldier or Marine. The ship sailed as the last pier was blasted at Hungnam. Convoys of U.S. merchant ships carried the men and equipment from the brink of overwhelming defeat back to where we could start again the long fight for freedom. It's an impressive story, this tale of American merchant ships and their cargoes to Korea. During the first 6 months of the fighting, merchant ships, privately owned or chartered from the reserve fleet of the Federal Maritime Administration by private American operators, carried more than 80% of all supplies that went to the battlefront. So you see, it's a story Americans should know. For Korea showed us again that we need merchant ships to carry the cargoes, to transport the men and equipment to fight a winning struggle anywhere in the world. We need modern and fast American cargo vessels, and tankers too, the expanding fleet of ships. We need large and fast liners that can be made into troop carriers in a hurry, and fast cargo ships that the private enterprise when peace is secured. America must always have a strong merchant marine.